Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Leadership Project. I'm very honoured today to be joined by Alena Sviderskaia. Alena is a passionate leadership coach, speaker and facilitator. She helps organisations to turn managers into leaders. And her biggest passion is to help people to find their true potential, to help them break down their mental barriers and to inspire them into action. So it's great pleasure to have Alena with us today. We're going to have a wonderful conversation about some of that tricky transition from being an individual contributor through to being a leader, about some of the differences between what a manager is versus what is a leader. And I'm really looking forward to hearing Alena's insights and wisdom. So Alena, thank you so much for joining us today. Please do go ahead and introduce yourself to our audience and what led you to be with us here today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here, and I'm a big fan. And I think having conversations like this around managers and leaders really normalizes some of the things that we're going to talk today about, because not a lot of conversations are really happening in the open, and that the conversations like that provide so much support. So I'm really excited to be here and to have a conversation around this. My path to what I do now started a long time ago when I wanted to be a psychologist. I really wanted to help people. I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. And then I spent over 10 years in corporate world in finance and accounting. And through that career, I met so many different types of leaders and managers as well, right? So not everybody is a leader. And I've experienced different styles of leadership, and it made me realize just how big of an impact a great leader can have on someone. And so then that what led me here and to this podcast, to what I do, and I'm really excited to talk about this.
That's wonderful, Alena. I want to dig into that a little bit more. What inspired you to go into psychology in the first place?
Oh, I was a teenager, and I read one book on psychology, and right away I said, "Oh my God, it's like the whole new world opened up in front of me." And I said, "This is so fascinating." It made me feel like I can understand myself better, and it became a key to opening a whole world, of why I do things, why I think a certain way, and how we interact with other people. So it always fascinated me, and I said I want to be a psychologist. And originally, I wanted to be a therapist,
Mm.
but then eventually, life happened, things happened, and my path changed a little bit.
Mm. I was planning to come to this topic later, but can you explain for the audience the difference in your eyes between, let's say, a therapist, the term you use there, or a clinical
Mhm.
psychologist versus what you do now in coaching?
I think one of the biggest differences, the way I see it, and this is very personal opinion, is when we are, therapists or psychologists tend to work with people who are having real challenges in terms of, maybe there are some issues that are interfering with the abilities to live their life or live their life the way they want to, right? So it's almost, if you think about it, a therapist or psychologist is trying to get somebody to that average level to make sure that they can just go ahead and live their life normally.
Mm.
When I think about what most coaches do, and again, this is my personal opinion, based on not
Please.
based on science or anything like this, but the way I see coaching is taking somebody who wants to go really high up, but
Mm.
really experiencing some barriers, has maybe it's somebody who has dreams and plans and goals that are really big, but there are some fears, there are some mental barriers,
Mm.
and they're not sure that they can do it. So that's where coach comes in and helps unlock this. And you talked about it earlier, mental barriers, really
Mm.
understanding what is holding someone's back, and what are the fears that are hiding underneath, and helping uncover that new level of potential.
Mm. I'll play that back to you a little bit in my own words and some my own reflections and see how it sits with you. So really, therapy quite often looks back and looks at people's past, and I'm going to use the word, the attempt to fix someone, which is a word I
Mm-hmm.
don't particularly enjoy, but there's something to that therapy, looking into someone's past. What has made me who I am today? Is there something stuck there, and to help someone address an issue. Whereas coaching is more about high performance and thinking about Seligman and positive psychology and what the positive impacts can come out of the world and the art of the possible and getting people
Mm-hmm.
to think differently to unlock their full potential. What's your reflection to that?
I love that. I love it. I think, overall, therapy and psychology, taking somebody who is below average, taking them to average, and coaches take somebody who is average and takes them to the extraordinary. That's what I
Okay.
would like to see. And you're absolutely right. I love what you described. Yeah.
Okay, good. Well, thanks, Alena. So, how did you land in coaching then? So, when did you make the decision to go, okay, I'm not going to
Mhm.
go left here and become a therapist and a clinical psychologist? My desire is more in the coaching field. What led you there?
hmm So it probably started about 6 years ago. I started thinking about this. I was still in my corporate job and I was in finance and accounting. And I knew that if I would continue this way, I knew with 100% certainty that I will come to a certain point of my life with regrets because I knew that my strengths and my talents that I had, I'm not able to use it to the best of my ability. So I knew that what people are coming to me for is for that, for that inspiration, for that push to and support to help do something amazing. And I was trying to find the best way to apply that. And I started looking into different things. I realized at this point, I realized that therapy, I love therapy and I went to therapy. I really enjoyed it, but I thought it's not going to use my strengths to the best in the best way. So I started looking into coaching and I actually graduated from a coaching program about 4 years ago, and I still wasn't sure what I wanted to do with that. And when I reflected, as I said, on my corporate career and realized where are some of the areas where I can really help is increase self-awareness of managers and really help them see the other side and really help them build a toolbox that will allow them to unlock potential in themselves and their teams as well. And so that's when I actually, the timing was perfect. I was moving from Montreal, where I was living at the time, to Toronto, and I had to change careers. I had to change jobs regardless. And that was a really big push for myself to go into coaching and start something new. And it was the best decision I have ever made.
Well, I'm really pleased to hear that, Alena, and the world is better for it because you're now a superstar coach and helping people to unlock their full potential, and it's unlocking your full potential in the world to
Love,
realize that you have that gift. Now,
love that.
you said something in particular there I want to dig a little bit deeper in. You said about self-awareness. Why is self-awareness so important?
Because I truly think that without self awareness, we're not able to change anything. This is it's like in GPS, right? To get somewhere, we need to first know where we are so we can understand how to get there best. And unfortunately, when it comes to self awareness, we really overestimate how self-aware we are. And I just had a conversation with somebody this morning and we were talking about this, and we're not even built to be self-aware. If you think about it, our ears, our eyes are all looking outward. We're not built to look inward. It requires intentional effort on our behalf, right? Because first of all, we don't have the time. We're too busy. We live very hectic lives. So we said, who has time to stop and think about who we are, what we want, what we're good at, what we want to improve? It becomes almost like a luxury that we can't afford. So we're not looking at this. And the second is that we're not built to look inward. As I said, we're looking at the world around us and we see other people better than they see themselves because we can see the decisions they make. Kind of, we have that step back. Whereas when we are inside ourselves, we're not. there's so all sorts of emotions, the that the talk inside the head, we're not able to really have a good view of ourselves, I think.
That's a really interesting observation there, Alena. I've never heard that one before. That we're geared in and live in a world that's very extrinsic. It's extrinsically motivated. And yet, well, you and I know, both coaches, that the most powerful coaching sessions come from being reflective and potentially looking intrinsically at our own
Hmm.
perspectives and how we're seeing ourselves in our world. I've never heard that before. What are your thoughts there about the power of being reflective, and share that with our audience?
Absolutely. And I think the advantage of having coaching conversations and coaching sessions is that it allows that space, dedicated space to go inward. And the coach, and the way I see coaches as guides through that internal thought process or what's coming up, tuning in into the emotions. Because for me, one of the biggest discoveries for myself personally is the power of emotions. I In the past it was almost, oh, I feel sad or I feel excited, but it's when you have negative emotions, it's like, let's try to change that. Let's distract ourselves, let's watch TV, read a book, think positively. But what's interesting is any strong emotion is the signal that your body is sending you about yourself,
Mm,
right? So it's when we're reacting strongly to something, be it really positive or negative, it's because it's important to us. And in that moment, it's actually really important to sit back, almost close off to the outside world and to go inward and to ask ourselves, what's there? If I'm terrified of something, what am I terrified of? And kind of go deeper and deeper and deeper, because as you probably know as well as a coach, everybody knows the answers. They know it, they just don't have sometimes the connection to those answers.
right.
And the coach becomes that bridge in guiding someone inward to find those answers. And that's what I really appreciate about coaching, coaching in general.
Mm. That leads me to an interesting question, and well said, Alena. And coaching, for those that have been through coaching, this is exactly what happens. You end up on a journey of self discovery and self awareness, things that are inside you, but the coach really helps you declutter, helps you see things through different lenses and different perspectives, but is really drawing out of things that really are deep inside you in the first place. What do you think is the difference between coaching and mentoring? Because many people have mentors, but not a lot of people, or not everyone, goes to the length of getting a coach.
That's a really, really good question, and I hear that quite often, right? Because there's a lot of confusion between what is mentoring, what is coaching. I think when it comes to mentorship, and this is, again, this is my view on this. When it comes to mentorship, we're going to someone because of their experience,
Mm,
right? So we're trying to learn from someone else. We're trying to understand what stages they went through, how they would address that, right? So it's guidance. It's understanding someone else's experience. There's not really an accountability. I don't see mentorship is necessarily being a two-way street. It's mostly us, if we're trying to get a mentor, we're asking questions, we're trying to understand, we're trying to apply that. Whereas coaching is the other way.
mm,
It's focusing on yourself and trying to understand what do you want, kind of trying even to sift through all the goals and the needs and wants, trying to understand what belongs to me, what belongs to other people, and what are goals that I'm supposed to have versus what are my own goals that I really want to pursue. It's around self-acceptance,
mm,
self-discovery, self-reflection. So
mm.
that's how I see it. What are your view on that?
Yeah, I fully
I
agree.
would love
So,
to know.
yeah, so coaching is drawing out of the person and taking them on a journey of self discovery where they're learning more and more about themselves and how they see themselves in the world every day, giving them new
Mm-hmm.
ways of thinking, well, allowing them to discover new ways of thinking would be a better way of saying it.
Mm.
And then mentoring is benefiting from someone's advice and experience. They might be 20 years, 30 years, 40 years in your industry, and they've been there and they've had their own stumbles, etc. There's a time and a place for both of them,
Mm-hmm.
and advice can be great. Mentoring can be great and it can be helpful. It's coaching that is really transformative in terms of discovering new
Mm-hmm.
ways of thinking, as I mentioned. In fact, I'll say there's a time and a place for each of the mindsets. We mentioned before about
Absolutely.
therapy and being able to help someone address problems in their world. So there's a place for therapy. There's a place for a teaching mindset, which is considered to be the other one of the four. So
Mm-hmm.
teaching, therapy, mentoring, and coaching are four different things, and each of them have their time and place. Yeah, that would be my
Mm-hmm.
view.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Let's transition now to what you specialize in, Alena. So you talk about helping organizations to transform people from manager to leader. What, in your view, is the difference between a manager and a leader?
Mhm. Manager, I would say when it comes to managers, it's managing the process. It's more of results based on this is what needs to be achieved. This is how we get there. So it's more process oriented.
Mm,
And just like what you said earlier with mentorship and therapy, there every leader needs to be a manager. There has to be a manager, right? We have to
mm,
manage the process. But I think leader is an extra layer to that. The leadership is around strategically getting results through people in the best way possible,
mm,
right? So it's around leveraging strengths. It's around unlocking fuller potential of your people. Because when a leader creates an environment that allows people to be motivated, not afraid to fail, right? So innovate. And when people are excited to come to work, so their energy is high up and there is high performing team, the results of the whole team go
mm.
up. But it requires certain skills. It requires self awareness. It requires developing specific tools and processes around that, right? Habits, leadership habits.
Yeah, very good. So once again, there's a time and a place for both, and you need both, right? So
Absolutely.
without managers, not a lot would happen. To be honest, you would inspire people,
Absolutely.
but you wouldn't make a lot of concrete progress against a project
Yeah.
or whatever the case may be, right? So
Manager is not a bad word
no,
at
it's not a
all.
bad word. It's not a bad word. So managers
Absolutely.
focus a lot on projects. They focus a lot on what are we going to do, how are we going to do it, how much is it going to cost, how long is it going to take, all of those things. Whereas a leader will be more interested in the vision, the mission, and inspiring the people into action. And a leader will be more focused on how do I inspire my people, how do I look after my people, how do I
Yeah.
make sure that they feel that they matter and what they do has purpose and meaning? Whereas a manager will be going, okay, the project, the outcome, I need to get to this finish line. A leader may not have a finish line. Their vision may be very much what Simon Sinek would call an infinite game, one that keeps on going. But a manager will be working towards some kind of finishing line, trying to keep a project under budget and achieve certain goals, etc. along the way. So yeah, good description. Thanks, Alena. Now, you also speak a lot about the transition from someone being an individual contributor to being in their first leadership role. Why do you think that transition is so tricky?
And that this transition is so critical, and I'm really glad that we're talking about this because I don't think a lot of people are prepared for that there is a transition, right? So I talked earlier about habits, and habits have a really powerful impact on how we show up and what we do. I genuinely believe that we become our habits eventually, right? So when we talk about individual contributors who are transitioning into leadership roles, they bring with them all the habits that they have accumulated through years of being usually very high performing individual. So that means, they're typically someone who is really high, have high motivation. So then when you have somebody like this in a leadership role, well, they need understanding of how to motivate people who may not be as highly motivated as them,
Mm.
right? So it's understanding that there are other ways to that there are extra tools that they need to have. And also, I think the focus of high performer is on individual performers. So we're responsible for our own performance. So we, in full control of this, we're saying, okay, this is what we need to get, this is how we get there. When you transition to the leadership role, all
Mm.
of this switches. You're no longer the star player. You should not be the star player. You're moving into a supporting role. You mentioned that you need to take care of your people. So that it's a different lens, and it's not just
Mm.
an additional responsibility, which often happens, unfortunately, when there's no well thought out transition that happens. Usually, leadership becomes an additional task.
Mm.
I do all this stuff. It's kind of continuing my process. And now the 10% of my time, I'm gonna manage the team.
Mm.
Whereas leadership, really, this transition is about completely switching this lens of how you see yourself, how you see your team, how you see yourself. Because now, as a leader, your actions, your words, it becomes a teaching mechanism, right? So when you are in a leadership position and you say one thing but you do another, you're actually creating confusion for your team.
Mm.
It's it's there is that, yeah, confusion. People don't know, do I do what you say, or do I do how you do it? So you have to embody, what you want to teach to other people.
Mm. Yeah, really good, Alena. I want to reflect back on that, and what I'm taking away from what you're saying is that one of the keys is that the things that made them successful and get them to where they are today are not the same things that will make them successful as a leader. And that can be a
Absolutely.
difficult mental transition for someone to go, all right, I'm the star player. Now, no, I am the nurturer and I'm looking to draw other star players out. That can be a
Hmm.
tricky thing. How would you rate, just be really open and answer this question however you see fit, how would you rate the state of leadership training? You mentioned about people not being well prepared for that transition. How would you rate the state of the world in that regard?
I think pandemic, actually ironically, brought a lot more attention to the gaps in leadership,
Mm.
because with everybody being forced to work remotely, the gaps in leadership all immediately became apparent. So if we had leaders who used to rule with fear and who used to micromanage and stay behind and say, do this, do that, why don't you do this? Now all of a sudden, not having people in the same room made it so much harder. Yet some teams actually were thriving because there was such a strong leadership foundation.
Mm.
The communication was built, the transparency, the trust, that that they transition almost seamlessly to hybrid or remote work environment. But I think a lot of companies realize that leadership, the impact that effective leadership has, and that not every manager is a leader, and that there needs to be an investment, especially now that we see people changing careers, changing jobs because of poor leadership.
Mm.
And the reality is the leaders who are not performing really well oftentimes are not performing well because they have not been supported in the right way, because that transition that we just talked about and building the toolbox really requires time and effort. So oftentimes what I see is then, well, can you do a 1 hour workshop, or maybe it's an offsite weekend retreat? This is not the way to build leadership skills.
Mm.
It can be a good refresher, could be a great bonding experience. We can make a lot of memories. We can make people feel great in that short period of time. But leadership requires change in behavior, change in habits, and these are ingrained. We need to try different things. We will fail as we're trying to become effective leaders. Failure is absolutely inevitable. You will try some tools, some will work, some will not work, but we need time kind of to experiment, go back, adjust, kind of this course correction before
Mm.
we can actually get to a point where we move on to the next level of leadership.
I'm hearing a few powerful things there, Alena. I'll play it back to you. So, first of all, a typical experience is that a leader gets, or a individual contributor gets tapped on the shoulder and says, congratulations, you're a leader now. And sometimes that's it. Secondly, it might be what you said. They get sent on a course, a leadership retreat, and they go away for 5 days, whatever the case may be, and go, all right, you're a leader now. And it kind of just doesn't work like that. You can't just learn leadership on a 5-day course and then all of a sudden you're blessed as a leader. And then the third thing I took away was that element of trial and error. Leadership is something that you have to work on every day, experiment with, and see what works. And what works for one team may not work for another team. So it's also about
Mhm.
adaptability. Really interesting. So if the 5-day retreat doesn't work, what can organizations do to smooth
Mhm.
out that transition for these individuals?
So I think in terms of leadership, the most powerful, the most impactful experience that we can imagine is when there's different support elements, as many as we um, can possibly add. So it starts with defining the role of a leader for somebody who's going into in the leadership position, right? So saying, okay, congratulations, now you're a leader, and I'm sitting here and I'm not even sure what that even means. Now I have to lead a team, but what does it mean for my day to day? We hear the word leader, lead, inspire, get results from people, but what does it mean? Like when I'm sitting in front of my computer, everything is firing up. There's an emergency, 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 and I'm kind of trying to deal with all of this. What does it even mean? What does it even mean for my day to day? So that's where the support from the organization needs to come in and to really work with somebody to help them understand what is expected of them, so
Mm,
then they can walk away and have that self feedback loop, if you will,
mm,
to try to understand, am I doing it right? Because probably one of the top things that I hear from leaders when I work with them one on one is that they don't know what their role is. They don't know. Especially, if you take somebody who's been with a company for 10 years, 15 years, right? And now they evolved into the leadership position. They used to be individual performer. They did really, really well, some technical stuff. Now they're growing, 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 things evolving, new responsibilities, new projects. Now you get to the point, okay, now you're also a leader of your team. So what am I really responsible? So usually, so all the trail of all of this comes through, and now they're trying to do the technical stuff, and then and do the intermediate stuff, and know all the answers, and it becomes really confusing. So it's really taking that moment and to say, what is this role look like? What does it mean for your day to day? What is the performance expectations, so you can walk away and say, okay, what do I need to do to meet or exceed my expectations? So it's building that
mm,
expectations, really, really important. It's one of the key components that's missing. And even if we add leadership training without clarifying that, it's also not going to be super effective, because then there's still that confusion. And what I find, when there's no solid foundation like this, people will take the tools, but they will drop them immediately because now there's another emergency, and they will just go back to the old habits,
mm,
right? So then once the solid foundation of expectations have been created, now there needs to be a support. There needs to be conversations, coaching conversations with their manager, right? For a
mm,
few reasons. So, one is to realign, to get that guidance, to get that support and safe space to fail and learn from mistakes, but also to show through experience that coaching conversations are valuable tools that
mm,
needs to be used with their team as well. Because when we have leaders and we tell them, you need to coach your people, you need to do one on ones regularly. And then I ask them, so how often do you have one on ones with your manager? Never.
Mm,
So they're never on the receiving end of this, right? So it's they need to be coached, they need to be supported. And then we need to create an environment of learning. Like, so it's if there is a leadership training, it needs to be long term, where there is a continuous space to try, come back, learn from it, readjust, and try again. Typically, I am a big fan of group leadership programs. Why? Because there's something about being in a group with other leaders who are going through the same issues and challenges.
mm,
And so normalizing the failures, normalizing the fears, normalizing the doubts, and having that co-mentorship support, if you will.
yeah, there's so many takeaways there, Alena. I want to do my best to summarize what you've just been through there, because there were many nuggets of gold. So, one of the things that you mentioned towards the end there was about the need for a role model of behavior. So, if they haven't seen good leadership in practice, that starts us at not a very good point. Then you were talking early days there about expectation setting. What does the organisation expect of their leaders? What does it mean to be a leader? You spoke about support environments and giving them the right environment for them to thrive. You didn't use this word, but you spoke of psychological safety to give them the
Mhm.
ability to make mistakes, give them the room that it is okay to make mistakes, and that leadership is a learning practice where you experiment and learn from your mistakes. And the last one you spoke of is really about collaborative learning and social learning. You know, be in a cohort with other leaders that are going through a similar journey to yourself, so that you can talk about it amongst yourself and learn off each other.
Mhm.
Some really powerful takeaways there. I want to circle back now to something that you brought up very early in our interview. What do you think that leader, that new leader, in this environment where they are uncertain about what's expected of them, etc., what do you think their emotional state is?
Oh, usually, and this is a very good question, because what happens typically is when somebody is they've been a great performer, right? So they've been leadership is becomes a reward
Mm.
for hard work, for high results. And we can talk about this, because I do not agree necessarily that this is the best approach, but leadership position often becomes this prize for you performing really well. So what typically happens is you transition to this new role where you all of a sudden, it's like somebody pulls the rag out from underneath you, and you're failing, you're falling down, because you all of a sudden you feel alone. Because if you've been promoted from within, and so now your team of your colleagues, where you were buddies, now all of a sudden you're maybe managing them, which is really awkward. Now you're kind
Mm.
of creating that barrier between you and your friends. So you can't necessarily discuss all the things, you can't get the support in the same way, right? So it's in that area that can be an issue as well. But it's also when there's no certainty in those expectations, and how, am I doing well, am I not doing well, there's that feeling of, now they're paying me more money, they're promoting me, I have no idea what I'm doing, I don't know if I'm doing it well. So the imposter syndrome
Oh,
is
yeah. Okay.
really prevalent. And I always, whenever I do my group programs, I do this anonymous poll and I say, well, here's some of the symptoms of imposter syndrome, tell me, have you experienced them, and how often do you experience them? Because it's anonymous, the results are at least 90% of people in the
Wow.
room
Okay.
experience it. At least 90. And it was really interesting when first they replied to me, and then I revealed the results. And you can almost see this sigh of relief, saying, oh, I'm not alone. Everybody's feeling this. I'm not alone. But leadership, when you're not feeling confident, when you're not feeling comfortable, when you're stressed, when you're pressured, it can be very isolating for that specific reason because you're so afraid to admit, I have no idea what I'm doing. You're not going to go to your manager who promoted you to say,
Oh,
I don't
yeah.
think I'm not good enough.
Yeah, right. So, there's so many things there again, Alena. I want to work on that last one first. They often don't have the confidence to stick up their hand and say, hey, I'm not sure what I should be doing here, because they see that as a sign of weakness. But honestly, asking for
Mhm.
help is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength. But that's a very difficult lesson to learn, and it takes time to
Yeah.
learn that asking for help is a sign of strength, not a sign of weakness. Uh, you spoke there about different emotions. So the you didn't use these words, but the euphoric highs of being recognized and getting that reward, right? So you get the reward that you got the promotion, but then the anxiety creeps in when you realize that you're actually not sure what you're supposed to be doing, and then through to what you said about imposter syndrome. Now, I'll stick up my hand here, be very open, and say that's not something I've ever had. And call me a psychopath or whatever, but I've never experienced any kind of imposter syndrome. But it doesn't mean that I don't understand that it's very, 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 very real for a lot of people. And what I
Hmm.
loved about the poll that you said, if I was experiencing something like that, so once again, I've not had it, but if I was going through something like that, and I was feeling like, what's wrong with me? Why is this not working, or whatever the case may be? And then I sat in a poll where I discovered that 90% of my peers were feeling it too. I would instantly go, oh, okay, so I'm not abnormal.
Hmm.
I'm not, there's nothing wrong with me. This is a normal kind of thing to go through. So well done to you. I really like the sound of that exercise. I'd love to be a fly on the wall the next time you do it. And
And this is the advantage of having a group program, right? To actually
mm,
share those feelings. And one other thing, and I forgot to mention that I think sometimes what also happens in new leaders after some period of time, they realize I don't like leading people
yeah,
because leadership position is often a reward. It's very difficult to say no to that. It's a
yeah,
natural progression. That's how the career hierarchy or the ladder was built, right? So it's when somebody offers you a leadership position, it's very difficult to say no to more money, to more prestige.
yeah,
But in reality, you may not enjoy this part of work. And unfortunately, whenever I speak to leaders, I often ask questions, trying to get to know them, asking what is the best part of your job, what is the worst part of your job. And you have no idea how often leading people comes as the part
yeah,
that they don't enjoy, and all they want is to go back to the good old days doing what they used to do, because that they genuinely don't want to be a leader, and not everybody wants or needs to be a leader.
yeah.
So that's where I think it's also tricky.
That's where you can have a double whammy effect as well, Alena. So you end up in a situation where I'll just take software engineering for today's example and say you've got
Hmm.
the best software engineer that the company's ever had. So they become a leader, but they really don't want to be. They become a poor leader. They become a demotivated leader, and you lose your best software engineer because they're not coding
Absolutely.
anymore, right? So yeah, yeah, very good.
Absolutely.
It is not for everyone. But for those of us that love it, it is incredibly rewarding when you begin to, I'll use these words carefully, begin to master it, because I don't think that you ever master leadership. You're always working on it
Hmm.
every day. But as you begin to really understand the human condition and how to inspire people and look after their welfare, etc., when you start seeing them bloom, when you see your team bloom and start knocking it out of the park, the intrinsic rewards at this point, oh my God, it makes me feel warm and fuzzy just talking about it right now. It is so amazing,
Yes.
that feeling, but it's not for everyone. It's really not for everyone.
No.
Okay. What do you think are the most common mistakes that new leaders make?
Um, I think probably, and there are a few different ones, but I think the first that come to my mind that can probably do a lot of damage is trying to fit a certain mold, right? So I have plenty of leaders that I talk to who are introverted, and they're fantastic at caring for their people, listening, and then they come in to the session asking to help, asking me to help them become this outgoing, extroverted, decisions on the fly type of person. So it's that the deep lack of self-acceptance,
Yeah, right.
and really, and there's a reason for that, right? Because there has been a stereotype of this loud and talkative and inspirational leader, but in fact there's not one single way to lead. You can lead in a very different styles of leadership, as long as you have, as if you as long as you have this focus on helping your people and unlocking their potential. There are different ways to do that. There are extroverted leaders who do fantastic job. There are introverted leaders who do it in a different way, but do as fantastic of a job. So it's, I think that's probably the biggest mistake, because it takes away so much energy from really understanding and leveraging your strength to focus on fixing something that's wrong with you.
Mm,
So first of all, that's not a very good place to be in, always trying to fix something in yourself, because it also translates into your leadership. If you cannot accept yourself as you are and leverage your strength, well, that has an impact on how you lead your team. So
yeah.
then your natural response would be to, this is all that's wrong with you, let's fix that. Right? So it's what you, the way you lead yourself, that's the way you lead your team.
Mm.
So I think that's probably the biggest one.
Yeah, that's a really interesting observation. I like this, Alena. So the the thought that they're playing the role of leader. They're not being the leader, they're playing the role of
Hmm.
leader, and then they're mimicking the behaviors of other leaders that they've seen and trying to copy them instead of being their authentic self. Whereas when you poll people about what are you looking for in a leader, one of the things that they're looking for is authenticity and vulnerability and being yourself. That's a really good one. Yeah, well done, Alena. I can see that as a very common trait of the new leader. Oh, I'm the leader
Yeah.
now. This is what I must do, and I must behave this way, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
really interesting.
And other people feel when we're not being authentic, right?
Mm,
When we're trying to pretend to be somebody, it's kind of fake it till you make it approach.
mm,
It's isolating, because it's very difficult to build
yeah.
deep, meaningful relationship when you're not being yourself, right? When it's very difficult when you're hiding your failures, when you're hiding your mistakes, when you're trying to pretend to be somebody. Other people feel it, even though they're not sitting there, oh, they said this or they said that, but it's with our gut. We feel it, that something is
Mm,
off, there's something confusing, we don't feel comfortable. So we're kind of we're built that way. The intuition will show that, and it's a colossal waste of energy.
mm. I'm gonna borrow some words from my good friend David Knorr. He was on episode 39 of the podcast, and he was talking about relationships. Absolutely wonderful interview. And Nor, I hope you're listening, and we need to catch up again soon. He very bluntly said, most everyone has a BS radar, right? So people can pick up when you're
Yeah.
not being your authentic self.
Hmm.
You also circled back there to loneliness. Let's talk more about that. So that's twice you've brought that up now.
Hmm.
Is it lonely to be a leader, and does it have to be?
It can be, and it doesn't. That's the short answer. But
Mm,
it, and I hear this quite often, that leadership can be quite isolating, and that's because sometimes, all the challenges that we talked about before, creates a barrier, right? When we are trying to hide something, when we're not able to admit certain things, not ask for support. So that already builds some barriers, right? When we're trying to pretend to be somebody else, even bigger barriers. But it's also, I think, the nature of leadership is very unique, because as you go up in your title and your level of responsibility, I think it kind of becomes this, kind of like a mountain, where now your issues are quite unique.
mm,
The level of responsibility that you have is also higher, right? So it's very difficult to share that with somebody and really have somebody understand. It's almost like I have an example, trying to explain to somebody what it's like to have kids when they don't have kids. I mean, for certainly, I had friends before I had kids who were telling me about this. I was interacting with little babies, with kids. But when you have your own kids, your world changes, and you're
Yeah.
you're not able to comprehend it just by trying to understand with your analytical mind. Same thing as with losing somebody you love. If you've never lost anybody, it is not possible to understand what that feels like. So the same thing with leadership in a way, because the stress, the combination of all of this kind of creates that loneliness sometimes, especially
Mm.
when there's no support, when there's no one-on-ones, or when there's nothing, nobody who can really understand. So that's where, the second part of this is, does it have to be lonely? It doesn't have to be lonely if we are intentionally create support around us. It can be through co-mentorship, right? So it's when you have a CEO and another CEO, it is easier to understand the issues and challenges, right? It's kind of like, again, parent and parent. We understand
Mm.
some things, we just understand intuitively because we've been through that. So
Yeah.
that's definitely a start of having that support group.
Yeah, that's great, Alena, and that's very true. Like parents have support groups. We go to parents' family. Sometimes they're called mothers' clubs. I prefer them to be called parents' clubs. But anyway, parent support groups, CEOs, absolutely. They form masterminds together where two CEOs will get together and go, oh, look, I'm having this challenge at the moment, and
Mhm.
they're experiencing the same emotions as each other, so they're able to empathize with each other and help each other. And leaders at all levels of any organization need
Yeah.
something like that. Yeah, really good.
And, and I often, whenever I have groups of leaders from the same organization, I always encourage co-mentorship. So
Mm.
having the, weekly, bi-weekly, monthly meetings where you can learn from each other, when you can share, even after the program is done, the co-mentorship relationships often continue, and they become this co-learning, co-supporting relationship, right? So this is,
Yeah.
every little bit helps.
Last night, I got to share this with you now. It's just popped into my head, but last night I caught up with my dear friend Ross Nicol, and he's a coach. He's an internal coach, so he works at the University of Newcastle, and he does a lot of things inside an organisation, and I generally do mine externally now. But he was having some things that he was talking through, and he was talking it through with me. And then I was talking to
Mhm.
him about a new client that I've got and preparing myself mentally for, okay, how am I going to start the first session with that client, etc. And it was just
Mhm.
bouncing ideas off each other, and just the ability to talk it through with someone that has experienced the same things that you experience, all of those kind of things. The answer, the problem that I was having, the answer was inside me, and Ross just helped me talk through it. And the problem that Ross was experiencing, the answer was inside him, and I just help him talk through it. It's like, it's wonderful to have someone that's your peer that you can talk things through and have that support network. Yeah, really good. All right, thanks, Elaine.
Mhm. And creating, and thank you so much for sharing. It's also creating that space,
Yeah,
right? To giving each other that space to talk it out. Because otherwise, if you didn't have that call, you would not be talking out loud to yourself, right? So
yeah,
it's you would be doing other things. But having that safe space to talk about it, all of a sudden just generates
absolutely.
ideas.
Yeah, very good, very good.
Fantastic.
All right, so with all that being the case, what do you think that new leaders need to let go of?
I think there are a few. I think one of the things that I would say is the notion that leadership is not about you. So it's, I think, probably one of the shortest, that's the message. It's not about you. So that takes a little bit of pressure off, because I think new leaders really need that. With not being in all the details, but
Mm,
it's two things. It's not about you, and you can learn it. It is
yeah,
a learnable
very
skill.
good.
It's
Yeah,
not. you're born a leader or you're not born a leader. It is for
Yeah.
vast majority of people. It's a skill. It's a toolbox,
Yeah.
and you can learn it.
All right. That's a good one. I want to bounce off that now. If they're going to learn it, what do they need to unlearn?
You know, and that's one of the things, and one of the things for sure that we talked about before is that leadership needs to fit a certain mold, right? So it's one thing that definitely, that's something that I would love for leaders to unlearn. It's, let's get rid of all the stereotypes and let's really look at what we're trying to achieve, right? And then the how, we'll figure this out. How can be so different for different people.
Mm.
So it's unlearning that the stereotypes I would love for people to unlearn. But I also think, and this is also very personal to me, but it's the mindset, the growth mindset versus fixed mindset. So that the whole idea of, I was born a certain way and I cannot change it. Meaning that some people were born a leader, some people were born naturally good at something, and that's what they are. And I can't really change who I am. I think that one idea is a huge barrier for leaders. It's a
Mm.
huge barriers, internal barriers for leaders, and it's a huge barriers for effective leadership as well. Because again, when somebody believes that you're born a certain way and you can change, they not only they're terrified of failure because it's kind of a proof that they were not born the right way, right? So now the failure becomes this huge thing that they're afraid of. So it can lead to avoiding doing certain things or blaming other people when failure happens. That's when it happens. No, it's his fault. No, it's her fault. So not accepting that, yes, okay, I failed, I tried, I failed, I learned from it, I move on because I can change. I can improve. But it also has a very negative impact on leadership. Because if I have a fixed mindset and I believe people are born a certain way, when I meet somebody, my first impression, I tend to cling to it. Meaning that if I meet somebody and I think and I label them as smart, I label them as hardworking, if I have a fixed mindset, there's very little change that I'm going to change that. Even if you show to me something otherwise, or the opposite, right? If I think somebody is lazy, or I think they lack motivation, or they don't have what it takes, even if they improve their performance, I will still label them as this
Mm.
because deep down, I don't believe people change. So I think the mindset part, and I always try to address that first because that's where the unlearning needs to happen.
Mm. Okay, good. All right, well, thank you, Alena. That's really powerful. So, being able to unlearn and let go of the stereotypes that you spoke of,
Hmm.
learning from leaders around you, but not copying them. All right. So
Hmm.
don't go into learned behavior, but you learn from your experiences. You have a growth mindset, and have that understanding that you yourself can change, you yourself can grow, and so can your team. And part of your role is to give them the environment that allows them to achieve their own full potential and their own growth trajectory. So yeah, really powerful stuff, Alena. I appreciate that a lot. So that's probably a good time to bring us to a close. As with all of our interviews, we go into a little bit of a rapid fire round at the end. So I've got a few questions for you here.
Okay.
So, Alena, what's the one thing that you know now that you wish you knew when you were 20?
I would say, and I mentioned that today, is that you are your habits. I spend so much time trying to work on my discipline and work against certain things, whereas now I realize it's the habits. I need to build habits. This is the
Mm.
shortcut to all the changes that we need to make, this including leadership.
Mm. I feel another interview coming up with you one day, Alena, where we got to dig more into this habit thing. You've brought it up multiple times,
Absolutely.
and I fully agree with you, by the way. It's
Game
all about,
changer, game changer.
yeah, habit building. And habit building is a deliberate action that takes time. You've got to be
Mhm.
patient with it. one habit at a time, maybe two, but build just a small number of habits and make them habitual. And then that's when you can start seeing real growth. I think we should have a chat about that someday.
Absolutely. I'm
Oh,
in.
all right, great. All right, what's your favorite book?
My favorite book is, well, actually, I want to name two. So one is Mindset by Carol Dweck.
Mm,
It was a life changer for me. I almost gave up on my business, and I read this book at a very good time. Timing was everything, and I made a decision because of that book to continue. And oh
mm,
my God, I'm so glad I did. And the second one is Culture Code.
okay.
Culture Code was fantastic, and I highly recommend for any leader to read that, because it gives this before and after picture, and best practices. So some things that you can you definitely a lot of learning lessons there.
Well, we're glad that Carol's book had that impact on you as well, because that means that you're here with us today. So good. And what is your favorite quote?
My favorite quote is, whether you believe you can or you can't, you are right. It ties in really nicely with all the mindset and the mental
Yeah,
blocks.
nice one.
I truly, truly believe that.
So that,
Whether you believe you can or you can't, you're right.
so that one's Henry Ford. That's one of my favorite ones, and that can be applied in
Mhm.
so many aspects of your life, from sport through to leadership to um, everything that you do, relationships. Whether you think you can or can't, you're
Mhm.
probably right. So I'll give you an example from sports. If you come up to a a standing jump, right? So let's say you got a
Mhm.
wooden stick at a certain height, and your personal trainer is telling you, okay, you're going to jump over it. If you tell yourself that you can't jump over it, I can tell you you never will. If you tell yourself that you can, there's a good chance you're going to get over it. And you can apply that in every aspect of your life. Yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
really good, Alena. Thank you.
I, I genuinely believe that the strongest barriers to anything are mental. They
Mm,
are internal. Because what something the example that you just mentioned is somebody who decides that I can do this. It triggers a series of actions and ideas of what can I do to try.
yeah.
So just by virtue of expanding that horizon, we increase our chances. Absolutely. I love that example.
Yeah, very good. And you can just keep on going. You know, basketball. A basketball player standing at the free throw line thinking, I'm not going to make this shot. Yeah, they're not going to, right? Yeah, very good.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Finally, I'm sure our audience have got amazing value out of today's interview, and we thank you so much for that, Alena. If people want to know more, how do they get in contact with you?
The easiest way to get in contact with me through my LinkedIn. That's where I post a lot of my leadership content. And I think you can leave a link to my LinkedIn
Yeah.
below. And also I also have a website. And for anyone who is interested in downloading free talent retention guide that I have that relates to leadership and management, I would be happy to share that too.
Outstanding. And we will indeed put those links into the show notes. And I encourage you to do that. Connect with Alena on LinkedIn. Also, go to her website, download the Talent Retention Guide. It's very insightful and well worth having a look out for everyone out there. So, thank you again, Alena. Please, we've got so much value out of today. We wish you the best for the future, and I do think we might have to have you back on the show one day to talk about some of those topics we didn't get time to delve deeper into.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and I really enjoyed our conversation. And anytime you want to talk more, I'm in.
Excellent. All right. Thank you so much, Lena. You know what?
Thank
I'm going
you.
to put you right on the spot right now. I'm going to put a challenge out there. We're about, on the Leadership Project, we're about to launch our series of weekly live streams. I would
Ooh,
love it if you joined us on one of those live streams and we could have a live Q&A
yep.
with our audience. And people out there that have got questions for Alena, you'd be able to ask them live and get a live answer from her. How does that sound?
I love a good challenge. I am in.
Excellent. All right, let's do it. Thank you so much, Alena. You have a
Fantastic.
great day. All
Thank
right.
you, Nick. Bye.